Good morning, Year 11. So we're going to have another look today at English Language Paper 2, Question 5. We're going to start with the silent do now. So there are 7 questions on the board. So please pause the screen now and work your way through. We'll allow you 6 minutes to work your way through these 7 questions. Please write in full sentences. Your time starts now. Okay, so let's go through this together. Defining the following techniques. Personification, it's where an inanimate object, an object that does not move, is given human qualities. Number 2, dramatic irony. This is where the audience are aware of something that the characters are not. For example, in An Inspector Calls, we the audience are aware that the Titanic sank in 1912, whilst Mr. Burling is ignorant of this fact. Number 3, a triplet is when ideas are given as a group 3. It might be 3 different words. It was cold, dark, depressing, or it might be the same idea that's repeated 3 times. I asked her over and over and over again. But it's where ideas are given as a group of 3. Number 4 is dialect. This is language that shows where a character is from. It's different to accent. Accent is something we hear, and dialect is something that can be seen written down on the page. For example, the word we is used by Scottish people. Let's have a wee drink. That's dialect. It's a word that implies and shows where a character is from. Hyperbole, this is exaggeration for dramatic effect. I jumped as high as a house. No, you didn't. You're exaggerating. It's hyperbole. And we're thinking about an anecdote. We know that that's one of our De Forest techniques. An anecdote, a personal story, adds colour and makes the account more personal. Number 2, a cliffhanger. A cliffhanger ending leaves the reader in suspense. The story is not resolved. All of the narrative threads are not resolved. Okay, so moving away from our silent do now, we're going to remind ourselves, English Language Paper 2, Question 5. These are 6 of the transactional texts we could be asked to produce. Now we know that for our exam this year in 2022, we are going to be told in advance what the type of transactional text will be. We've already practiced writing a letter form. But it could be a letter, a magazine article, a newspaper article, a speech, a blog, a diary, or a journal entry. So the question will ask us to either argue our point, persuade the reader, or write to inform our reader. And it will always tell us the audience. It will always tell us who it is that we are writing for. So the question will tell us, in the question itself, it will tell us the form, i.e. a letter. It will tell us the purpose, to argue our point, to inform the reader. And it will tell us the audience. For example, write a speech that you will deliver for your year group. So we know that there's 40 marks for this question, and those 40 marks are divided into AO5 and AO6. AO5, we get a maximum of 24 marks for the content we put into our document and how we organise that. For example, if we're writing a letter, we want to make sure we're using the conventions of the letter writing form, addresses, dates, opening salutation, closing valediction. And we also get 16 marks, a maximum of 16 marks for the quality of our written communication, including spelling, punctuation and grammar. Okay, so we know that our De Forest techniques are really important when we write transactionally. These De Forest techniques are really going to help us produce an effective document in the exam. So what I'd like you to do now is for the screen to be paused and give yourself 3 minutes on the clock. How many of the De Forest techniques can you remember? How many of the De Forest techniques can you remember? Hopefully all of them. Pause the screen now. So here are the Forest techniques: direct address, talking directly to our reader using the personal pronoun you, alliteration and anecdote, facts and statistics, opinion including expert opinion, rhetorical questions, questions asked for dramatic effect, repetition, emotive language and exaggeration, superlatives, that language that implies the best, and triplet, where ideas are given as a 3. So make sure that you have all of these present and correct. Add in any that you didn't get. Also, we remember that when we write transactionally and when we read transactional texts, we're still looking out for all of those techniques we might find in English language paper 1. Simile, metaphor, semantic field, all of those type of things too. Alright, so our challenge today is this. Let's imagine that we are being asked to write a letter to the managing director of a model agency, and we are going to explain our point of view in relation to the given statement. The statement is this: size 0 models have a negative and dangerous effect upon young people's body image. Modelling agencies should not be allowed to use size 0 models. And we need to think about, okay, size 0 models, they are models, fashion models that are very thin. Size 0 is the equivalent of a UK size 4. And we're going to think about, okay, opening the pages of a magazine, watching an advert on the television. What might be the consequences of a model agency using size 0 models? So the statement here says size 0 models, very thin models, have a negative and dangerous effect upon young people's body image. Do we agree with that? Do we agree that size 0 models have a negative and dangerous effect upon young people's body image? And then it further goes on to say modelling agencies should not be allowed to use size 0 models. It implies some kind of ban. Okay, so we know we're going to have to write a letter to the managing director of this model agency, and we need to explain our point of view. And before we even think about writing our letter, we need to think about what is our point of view. So what we're going to spend some time doing now is thinking about the for and against. What might be the benefits of using size 0 models? Size 0 models are very popular. Obviously, model agencies use them, advertising agencies book them. What might be the benefits of using size 0 models? So we're going to take this first column here, and I'm going to give you 3 minutes with the person you're sat next to, and I want you to think about all the arguments in favour of using size 0 models. Remember, we're not saying that we agree with this, we're not saying this is our opinion, we're trying to think of what might be the argument in favour of using size 0 models. Why might they be used? What might be the purpose and the point of using size 0 models? What arguments can we come up with in favour of using size 0 models? So we're going to put 3 minutes on the clock, and we are going to work with our partner to discuss, and I want us to come up with at least 2, ideally 3, arguments in favour of using very thin size 0 models. Pause the screen for 3 minutes and be ready in 3 minutes to share your ideas. Okay, so you've now had 3 minutes to talk about arguments in favour of using size 0 models. So the teacher will now ask you to share those, and we'll write those up on the whiteboard. You now need to divide your page in half, and half of your page needs to capture the arguments in favour of using size 0 models that you are about to share with the class now. So I'm going to stop talking so that the teacher can pause the screen and can gather all of those arguments in favour of using size 0 models. Okay, Year 11, so up on the board and in your books, you should have 2 or 3 at least arguments in favour of using size 0 models. Now we now need to think about the opposing side of the argument. We now need to think about reasons against using size 0 models. So again, in a moment, you're going to have 3 minutes with the person sat next to you, and you are going to think about, okay, what might be the dangers in using size 0 models? What might be the arguments against using size 0 models? So, teacher in the room is going to pause this for 3 minutes and allow you 3 minutes with your partner. I want you to come up with 2 at least, if not 3, arguments against using very thin size 0 models. Please pause the screen now. Okay, so you've had 3 minutes to discuss. What we're going to do is we're going to gather those arguments together, and we are going to record it on the opposite side of the page in our books. We've got our arguments in favour. We're now going to list the arguments against using size 0 models. So the teacher in the room is going to pause this and is going to gather in all of the arguments and write them up against using size 0 models, and we are all going to get that down in our book. Pause the screen now, please. Okay, so what we have in our books now is lines of argument in favour of using these very thin models and lines of argument against using these very thin size 0 models. You now need to look at your evidence and decide, what is your own point of view? What are you going to find most easy to argue? Now, this might not be your actual opinion on size 0 models. You're looking at the evidence in front of you and you're deciding, are you going to find it easier to argue in favour of size 0 models, or are you going to find it easier to argue against size 0 models being used? So I would just say take 30 seconds in a moment in your own head, thinking about which side of the argument, look down at the evidence in your book, which side of this argument are you going to find most easy to put forward? And I'm just going to say, pause the video for 30 seconds and share with your partner, are you going to argue in favour? Are you going to argue against? Pause the video now, please. So, in our mind, we're clear if we are arguing against or for size 0 models. We know that when we put together our letter to the editor of Elite Models, we are going to use the 6-stage approach. And today we're going to focus on the first 2 stages of our 6-stage approach. We are going to put together an opening argument that clearly lays out for the examiner to see exactly what it is you're arguing about. Are you in favour? Are you against? Make it clear right from the very start. We're also going to work on our picture this, where we outline the very worst case scenario if our argument is ignored. So here are some examples of 2 opening statements. We weren't told the name of the editor, so we've made up a name. Dear Saskia Khan. Nice formal greeting. Opening salutation. Nice formal greeting. The top one shows an example of a letter that argues against size 0 models. Dear Saskia Khan, I write to argue that modelling agencies, including your own, should not employ size 0 models. To do so has a very negative impact on the body image of impressionable young people. Very nice and clear. Right from the start, as an examiner, I know exactly what this young person is going to be putting across in this document. Nice and clear from the start. Similarly, we've got one underneath that's a really nice example of someone arguing in favour of size 0 models. Dear Saskia Khan, I write to argue that modelling agencies should be free to choose whether they employ size 0 models or not. Readers are able to choose for themselves what is healthy for their own bodies. So, similar opening, Dear Saskia Khan, and both are similar in that they both put across what it is they're going to be arguing about. So Year 11, you have chosen your side of the argument. What you now need to do is come up with a name for your editor at Elite Models. Address that editor. You could even write Dear Editor if that's easier, and craft an opening argument in which you make very clear what it is you are going to be arguing about. Are you for size 0 models? Are you against? I'm going to ask the teacher in the room to pause the screen for 4 minutes whilst you put together your opening argument nice and clearly, right into the editor, making clear your side of the argument. 4 minutes, please pause the screen now. Okay, so we've got our nice clear opening argument. What we now need is a picture this. Now we know that in a picture this, we imagine the worst case scenario if people do not listen to us. So if we are arguing that size 0 models should not be used, we might want to talk about picture this, an impressionable young girl looking at images of very thin models in a magazine. It's a thinness to which she will never be able to aspire. Picture the negative impression that will create on that young person's body image, etc., etc. If we are arguing that size 0 models should be allowed, we might argue, picture this, a government telling us what to do, a nanny state that tells us which models can be used and which models can't. Is that fair to size 0 models? We can argue the fact that they may be perfectly healthy and be a size 0. So you're going to think about your side of the argument, if you're arguing for or if you're arguing against. And what I would like you to do now is to draft your picture this. Picture this worst case scenario if your argument is ignored. And we're remembering that we're going to use our picture this colon. Picture this colon, 2 dots, so that we vary our punctuation in our response. So I'm going to suggest that you're going to need 10 to 15 minutes now, probably the remainder of the lesson at this point, to craft your picture this. We know that we're going to be dramatic. We know that we're going to use exaggeration, hyperbole. We could use humour. We could use an anecdote. What would be the worst case scenario if your argument is ignored? What dire consequences can you imagine and communicate to us as readers? 10 to 15 minutes, please, to do that now. Okay, Year 11. So that brings us to the end of our lesson. Some extra practice for us here on the English language paper 2. I just want to say to you that I hope you have a really nice Christmas. You have got your English language paper 2 Christmas revision booklet. If you don't have one of these, there are spare copies in the box on the right hand side of my desk. You can pick one of those up today to take home. Thank you very much, Year 11.